All right, so let's get into this. We're going to go through some cryptology fundamentals. And when we talk about cryptography, cryptography is the science of encrypting information. So there's a difference between encryption and cryptography. And when we talk about encrypting, that's scrambling data so that anybody who is unauthorized, any unauthorized party is unable to unscramble and read it. Now, the thing that it supports, as we look up here, everything from confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation. I'm sure you guys all remember what non-repudiation is. Authorization and access to information. And really, it's a pretty simple concept where we start with what we call plain text, run it through a cipher with a key, and from that, and the encryption key, out of that we get ciphertext, and then it has to be decrypted with some type of key to be returned back to plain text at the other end. So some terminologies just to be aware of. Like I said, we talked about the term cryptography, a method of storing and transmitting data in a form only intended for authorized parties. Now, encryption is the method of transforming data from plain text into an unreadable format. That is encryption. Okay, so when you think cryptography, it is the end-to-end process. You have encryption is the front end, decryption is the rear back end. Those two together makes up the cryptography process. Plain text, like we talked about, that's your data when it's in a readable format. Ciphertext, that's when the data has been scrambled. And two other really important things is the algorithm. And when we talk about the algorithm, that is the rules or the set of rules or procedures that dictate how encryption and decryption will take place. Also, sometimes called the cipher, the algorithm itself. And then the most important part of encryption is the key. And when we talk about the key, that is what's used in the encryption process that generates the cipher. That's not just generates cipher, but is used within the cipher, within the algorithm to actually do the encryption. So when we talk about the key itself, really, when it comes to cryptography, key management, key generation and key management, really, those are the my microphone is over here in my way. There we go. Getting a big shadow. It's really the thing that we're dealing with. Not so much the algorithm. It comes down to what we call Kirchhoff's principle, where Kirchhoff's principle says that the algorithm is not what we want to protect, it's the key. Now, when we're talking about that, the whole process of encryption is remembering that it's about what we call the workload factor. We want to make it very difficult for someone to be able to, someone unauthorized, to be able to crack the code and break the key. Any key is crackable, okay? Any key can be cracked, even a one-time pad. I know you're probably saying, oh, what a one-time pad? Well, one-time pads, yeah, if you give someone enough time and with enough money, enough workload, it can be cracked. So that's why protecting the key is very critical, very important. How you distribute and store your key. All of these things listed on this slide, very, very important. How we do key management, key escrow, all of those different things, extremely important when we talk about the key. So now let's talk about the cryptography process. How do we scramble data? Really, it comes down to about two methods: substitution, what we call confusion, and transposition, which is diffusion. Substitution, well, let's talk about transposition. Transposition starts out with what we call a Caesar cipher. And what a Caesar cipher is, this is how Caesar, the Roman emperor Caesar, who had all these outposts that, across the entire Roman empire. And he wanted to be able to communicate with his outposts, and he wanted to be able to do it securely. So he started doing encryption. He would take a wooden dowel, of a given size, wrap a piece of paper around that dowel like this, and write his message on it. It says what? Send help. Okay. Now, when you unwrap that, now you see everything has been transposed. Letters moved and shifted and all over the place. So if someone stopped one of his runners and they saw this thing of letters, it would make no sense. Why? Because it was encrypted. Now, when he got to the other end, got out to the outpost, the individual at the outpost, he had a wooden dowel that was the same diameter as the one that Caesar had. So then he would take that piece of paper, wrap it back around that dowel, and now that transposition would be retransposed back to the message, send help. Okay, so that's transposition. Now, substitution, on the other hand, that's when we substitute one letter or one item for another. This right here is called a rote 13. I mean, I've taken the 26 letters of the alphabet, and I've done a shift, basically rotated everything 13 positions. So now A becomes N, B is O, C is P. If you think about, A is the first letter, B second, third. So if I count all the way down, M is the 13th letter. Now I start here, 14th, all the way to the 26th. So now the A, the 1 becomes 13. B, which is the second letter, becomes O, which is the 14th. So I've substituted everything over, and I've done it with 13. Now, as simplistic as these sound, really, this is still at the heart and the core of how we encrypt. I will tell you today, though, however, the algorithms that we use with, it and NSA and other encryption algorithms, they run it through these processes multiple times and add many other things with it. But still, at the end of the day, you're doing either confusion or diffusion. So when we talk about encryption, two basic methods that we do this, we encrypt: symmetric encryption and asymmetrical. So we're going to talk about both of these. Let's get into symmetric encryption first. Symmetric, what does it mean? When you think about the word symmetrical, what does it mean? Same, right? So it's symmetry. So the same. That is what we're talking about with encryption, meaning that this is sometimes called private key, because to encrypt and to decrypt, you have to have the same key. So anyone with the key can either encrypt or decrypt. It's secured really by the most secure distribution keys to both parties. You've got to get both parties who are encrypting and decrypting to have the same key. Now, what challenge do you think that brings? Yes, I heard someone in the East Coast just answer. Key management. Yes, key management is the big issue, because now let's say that, like when I was in the military, when I was in the Air Force, I was a comm guy, and we did a lot of encryption, symmetrical encryption with KG device, KG40s, KG30s, KIVs 7s, and so on and so on. But the issue we would have, like I said, I could be assigned in Italy, and we were on the same network with maybe a guy's flying in the airplane, or someone who's still in the United States. How do we get everybody the same key? That was the challenge. And the way the military does it, they have the KDEMS, key distribution management system, that does that, getting the keys distributed to everybody, because everybody on the net would have to have the same key, and all with the same key, but the same key management, because we would have to change keys periodically, because you only want to use a key for a certain amount of time. So we would change keys either weekly, sometimes monthly. Well, here's the issue you would run into. Let's say that you're in Seattle and you're communicating with me, and I am in Europe, in Germany, or in Saudi Arabia. Well, if you think about time differences, so now everybody would have to be on the same radio day, meaning that all these keys, and we'd have to be synced to a time standard like Zulu or Greenwich Mean Time. Otherwise, the people, in Europe, they're changing their keys before somebody in the United States. And now we can't communicate because we're on a different key set. So that is the big thing when we talk about symmetric encryption, is key management. That is the big con. The pro, the positive, the advantage, it is very fast to encrypt and decrypt with symmetric. So that is the advantage. Disadvantage, key management. Now, how do we do this encryption with symmetric encryption? Basically two ways. And the way we do it the most is what we call block encryption. Block encryption takes a message that you want to encrypt, and it breaks it up into a fixed size blocks, and then it encrypts each block with the key. Here's what I'm talking about. So let's look up here at the top. This is my plain text. I say all this together is one message, okay? That's one set of plain text. What block encryption does is it breaks it up into evenly sized chunks or blocks, and then it applies the key to each block. And now we get ciphertext in blocks as well. And then we transmit that, whatever method we want to transmit that. That is the way block encryption works. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to block encryption. One is, like I say, it's fast. However, a problem you can run into with block encryption is crypto analysis, meaning that a crypto analyst, who, let's say the bad guy, who's getting this information, even though it's encrypted, even though it's ciphered, they are looking for one thing: a pattern. in cryptology, once something repeats, they got you. They got you. Because once anything repeats, a letter, an alphabet, now I can start seeing the pattern. And with block encryption, because we're using the same key over and over and over again, it increases the likelihood of something repeating. So that is one of the drawbacks to this. Now, there are some things that we do to help diffuse that, like cipher block chaining, CBC, cipher block chaining, or EBC. There's different techniques where we will take some of the cipher text here, feed it back into the plain text, back to the key, so that the key now has been salted or has a seed, so it looks differently. So now every block comes out looking a little bit differently. So there's methods like that that's used to reduce the likelihood of things repeating. Now, if you're going to looking at your certifications, this is an area, yeah, you need to know. I think it's about 20% or about 12% of your Security Plus no certification talks about encryption, and you will be talking about CBC, block chaining, cipher block chaining. There's about 5 or 6 blockchain methods that's used with block encryption. Now, here's some of the block encryption algorithms. Data encryption standard, DES. Like I say, now this is a fixed block size of 64 bits. And we really don't use DES that much anymore. Why? Because the block size is small, but not only that, it's the key size. It's a 64-bit key. And really, the effective key is only 56 because 8 bits is used for parity or checksum. So DES not really used because it's not that the workload factor to crack DES is pretty simple with the computing power we have with technology. So what they did in the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they came up with triple DES, meaning that they would take your plain text and run it through the DES algorithm 3 times. So basically triple encrypted. So that made it a little more secure. Another one is RC5. Like I say, that's the Revest cipher. Revest is the individual. If you've ever heard of the term RSA, they're the 3 individuals who did a lot of the mathematics to come up with these algorithms. But RC5, Revest cipher version 5. It's also a block cipher. Now, this has variable size blocks. Not that you can vary each block, but you select what size you want your block to be. You can have a 32-bit block all the way up to 128-bit block. And also, you can vary the key size all the way up to 2048 bits. So it gives you some latitude. And you may ask, well, why don't we just go to 128 and 2048 bits key size, 128-bit blocks? Well, there's trade-offs. In life, there's always trade-offs. The bigger the block size, the bigger the key, yes, it is, the encryption is better. It's more secure, but it becomes slower. Because now you got to think about the time it takes. I have a huge block and I have a huge key, and I got to mesh these together to go through that algorithm. So, and I'm doing this to hundreds of thousands of individual blocks. So now the time collectively it takes to do that, and the overhead it takes to do that gets bigger and bigger. So what you do, you try to find a happy medium between performance and security. Now, where we're at today is AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. That is really the replacement for all these. And AES is a 128-bit block, and as you see, you got variable key sizes, 128, 192, 256, and I think they've pushed it up past 256 now. So now, this is the de facto standard for symmetrical encryption, is the AES standard. Okay, so really, most things you see now is whether you're using secure socket layer, TLS, they're operating with AES algorithm. That's what that is. All right, second method of doing encryption, symmetric encryption, is what we call stream encryption. Stream encryption. And what stream encryption does, okay, the key is used with a key stream generator, which creates just a long series of bits. Instead of having a static key, now this key is continually being generated. Why would you use stream encryption? Good question. I am so glad you asked that question. Well, when you think about static data like email, like a lot of things we do with the internet, want to encrypt a document, doing that type of encryption. Block encryption works very well. Why? Because we can break that message up and encrypt the blocks and send it out across the email or send it out across RF, and the other end gets it and puts all the blocks back together and puts it in, and now you got your document back. But let's say if you wanted to encrypt streaming media, or as you're typing on a keyboard, like with teletype or keyboard inputs, and you want to encrypt that as it's happening. Now you need a different way of doing that. So that's why we use stream encryption, so that now we can stream a serial bit, stream of bits. Some of the drawbacks to stream encryption, it still uses an initialization vector, an IV. And there's some, and what that IV is, that's a random number, an arbitrary number that's used along with the secret key for generating your data. It's like a seed that gets the bit stream started. So some of the kind of a basic encryption, stream encryption algorithms, you've got Turing, like say key size variable, your initialization vector is 160 bits, RC4, which is again reversed cipher 4. He created a block and a stream encryption, and it has variable key sizes as well. And then you have VEST also. Like say if you're in your Security Plus books, you're going to see some of these algorithms. All right, now how does that work though? How do we do streaming? Well, like a lot of our encryption is really built around a Boolean mathematical function that we call the exclusive OR. The exclusive OR function, or XOR. So what that is, and I don't want to get too deeply into Boolean math and AND gates and OR gates and then NOR and NAND gates, but really we have to talk about the exclusive OR to really understand stream encryption. Also realizing that this function is used in a lot of encryption algorithms. So what an exclusive OR will do, let's say if you have two inputs, you will only get an output when the input 1 or input 2 is a 1 and a 0. So for instance, if you look at what we got here, input 1 is 0, input 2 is 0. On the output, we get a 0. Input 1 is 0, input 2 is 1. On the output, we get a 1. Input 1 is a 1 and a 0, 1. And even if they're both 1s, 1 and a 1 on the two inputs, you still will get a 0. So that is the exclusive OR function. So now how does this work? Very simplistic simulation I have here. Okay, let's say that these 1s and 0s, these are our plain text. Okay, and now we want, this is our key stream. This is our key that we're going to want to encrypt this with. So basically, we run it through this XOR function. So when the first one from our plain text comes down, it is XORed, it is exclusively ORed with our key bit stream. Oh, it's a 1 and a 1, so we get a 0. The next bit comes down, it's a 0, plain text. The key bit stream is a 1, XORed, gives us a 1. The next one gives us a 1, and it just follows that pattern, a 1 and 1 and a 0, and all the way down. So now you see that our cipher text is now 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. So now and this stream could keep going on and on and on and on. As long as we can generate a key stream bit, it can keep going. Now you have the similar issues though with stream is repetition, because pretty soon at some point your key is going to repeat itself. Even if you're using initialization vectors, if you're seeding it, salting it, doing everything else with it, it still will probably repeat itself. And then if it repeats itself, that's when a crypto analyst can start cracking the code. All right, let's shift to asymmetric encryption. When we talk about asymmetric, just like the term says, asymmetric, now we're talking two things that are not the same. Symmetrical, same, meaning private key, both parties need the key. Asymmetric, you got two keys, and they're not the same key, even though there's a relationship, but they're not the same. You have a public key and you have a private key. And this is why we call this public key encryption, as opposed to asymmetric was called private key encryption. So now what we have, like I said, we got plain text. It's going to be encrypted by someone's public key, turned to ciphertext, and it's going to be decrypted by the authorized persons who needs to see it with their private key. All right. Let's talk about this for a little bit. Like I said, there is a mathematical relationship between these two keys, between the public key and the private key. Now, the public key is given, why they call it public? because anyone can get access to your public key. It's made public. The private key is the one that we want to keep secret. You want to keep your private key secret. And in doing this, we can use our public key to encrypt the message. Okay. But then the private key is used to decrypt. So meaning that if I had your public key, I can encrypt the message with your public key, because I know the only person who should be able to decrypt it should be you, because you have the private key. We use it for signing messages or digital signatures. And the same thing. Now I can use my private key to sign it, because if I got the private key, that way it knows that I'm the only person who could sign it. But somebody on the other end can use my public key to validate it, because they know that this public key will only match up with the person who signed it private key. So that's when we talk about asymmetrical. Again, uses two keys, one for encryption, one for decryption. Now, this is what asymmetrical does for us. Because the two keys are asymmetric, meaning that they're different, that takes care of, in a sense, the key management problem. I don't have to worry about trying to distribute keys, because I'm keeping my public key and I don't care who gets the private key. It kind of goes out there, anybody can get it. Okay, so that kind of mitigates some of the key management problems that we had with symmetric. It also is good for providing integrity and proof of sender, or non-repudiation. Non-repudiation meaning that you can't deny it was you. So like I say, so if you send a digitally signed email from your computer, the asymmetric encryption provides the non-repudiation that, yep, that came from this system. Drawback, it is very slow, very slow. Why? Because there's a lot of handshakes that has to go on to set up the key management and things like that. So it's very slow. Now, what happens realistically, often we use the two, asymmetrical and symmetrical encryption, in a hybrid system. So what we do, we use asymmetric to do key exchange. So now I can exchange my symmetric keys using asymmetric encryption. And now once I've done key exchange, I no longer use asymmetric. Now I use symmetric encryption to do the actual bulk encryption. So that's how those two, most of the time, used together from that fashion. A couple of different algorithms you're going to see when we talk about asymmetric encryption. One is RSA. RSA, that's one of the big ones we use. We use it all over the place now. If you're on the internet, if you're doing shopping, if you're doing, on the web, you go to websites, you'll see that they use AES along with RSA. Second one is ECC, elliptic curve crypto. Actually, that is used a lot, especially like within Microsoft products and other operating systems for digital signatures and key distribution. As a matter of fact, if you're using secure shell, for instance, if you're logging into from one computer into another one using SSH, and what happens when you do that, you are self-generating your keys. You're not going out to a third party getting keys. That server, it actually generates its own keys, and it uses ECC many times as the method of generating the key and facilitating the digital signatures and encryption and the key distribution. And I will not get into the math of how these algorithms work, because they will make your head hurt. What I will say though, with RSA, it has to do with factoring prime numbers, okay? And the complexity associated with trying to reverse factor a prime number, a large prime number. So like we talked about, so it was the thing is with encryption is really what? Key exchange. Well, there's a couple of individuals, Diffie and Hellman. They kind of broke the code, and no pun intended, on how to do key exchange, because like I say, with symmetric encryption, key exchange is a big deal. So they used the asymmetric methodologies to allow two people to receive a symmetric key, and these two people don't know each other. You might say, do we do that? You do it every time you go to Amazon, you go to any type of e-commerce where you want to give them your credit card information and you want to shop securely. This is how it's done. This is how you and Amazon are able to exchange keys so that you can now exchange symmetric keys so that you can use AES-128 to do the encryption of your credit card information before it goes across the internet. So how does it work? Well, this is a very, 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 very simplistic example. The actual math, a little bit more in depth. But what we do, we start out with, we will pick a common number. Then think about this as your your computer and Amazon. You're getting ready to hit the purchase, what is that? The cart, shopping cart. Yeah, there you go. You're gonna hit the shopping cart. Yeah, I'm done shopping. I want to pay. Well, the Amazon server, your computer negotiates a common number. For this example, we're gonna use the number 2. All right. So common number is number 2 that both sides have. Now, what your computer will do is it's gonna pick a random number, and let's say 4. Now, when it's going to raise 2 to the power of 4, which is 16. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. And it's going to share that number, or a public, that'll become like the public key, with the other user, or with Amazon. Amazon is basically doing the same thing. It's going to take that same common number. It's going to pick a random number. Let's say it picks 5, and it does the same thing. It raises 2 to the power of 5, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 32. And it shares that with your computer. So now you guys have exchanged public keys, right? Well, now you take your public key, take the public key that you got from Amazon, raise it to your random number 4, and it's going to give you 32 to the 4th is 1,048,576. Amazon server is going to do the same thing. It's going to take your public key number 16, raise it to the random number that it selected, which is 5. 16 to the 5th is 1,048,576. And look at what we got right there. We have a common number. Now we both know something in common. So now that we know that, now we're able to, my computer and the Amazon server is able to take that common number and use it to generate a key, a symmetrical key. And the key will be the same on both ends because it's built off of a common number. And now we have just done key exchange. So when you're out there, that's what happens first, is key exchange. So we're using asymmetrical to do key exchange, to generate a way of exchanging the key. And now once the key is exchanged, now, if you notice, that's when you get the little lock in your URL up in the address, that little green lock. That tells you that key exchange has been done. Now your systems flip over to AES-128 and start doing the transaction with symmetric encryption. So we use asymmetrical for key exchange. Why? Because it takes a lot of the management problems out, but we can't really encrypt with it because it's slow. Then once we exchange keys, we go to symmetric encryption, and we encrypt the payload because it's much faster. All right, I hope that made sense. So that's how we get a shared key, or a pre-shared key. So let's talk about digital signatures a little bit. When we talk about digital signatures, using asymmetric encryption for that, it really is kind of this example of Alice and Sam. Sometimes it may be Alice and Bob. It seems like it's always Alice. Alice really gets around. There's Bob, there's Sam, and then there's the bad guy. I can't remember the bad guy's name, but Alice. Alice is always giving somebody her keys. Okay, so Alice sends Sam her public key because her public key is what is known to everyone. And then Sam will use Alice's public key to encrypt the message and send it back to her securely. So that is kind of that how we use it for encryption. So now when we talk about for digital signatures, a couple of questions we got here. First of all, let's say, how does Alice prove to Sam that a message comes from her? So, how is Sam supposed to trust Alice? And Alice is giving everybody her keys. How am I supposed to trust you, Alice? Oh, sorry. I got a little emotional there. All right, but here we go. Well, first, she has to demonstrate that she has her private key, because only the authorized person, it's her, should have her private key. So here's what happens. So Alice creates her public and private keys. She distributes her public key with her signature or her name attached, so that way Sam knows that this is Alice's public key. Now, Alice will encrypt a message using her private key and send the message to Sam. If Sam can decrypt the data with Alice's public key, the message must have been encrypted by Alice with her private key, because she's the only one who should have the private key. That's called a digital signature. So where you encrypt the message with your private key, send it to someone, their computer decrypts it with your public key. That shows the relationship between the public and the private key, digital signature. Okay, question number 2. How does Alice prove to Sam that she is Alice and she's not Nancy or Joanne or anyone else? Because Sam is really confused now. I don't know who Alice is. I don't know you anymore, Alice. Okay, how does she do that? Demonstrate that she has her private key. All right, here's what Sam does. Sam creates a random number. Well, Sam creates a pseudo-random number, because there's really no such thing as random when we talk about computers. But anyway, that's a whole different subject. And then he takes this random number, encrypts it with Alice's public key, and sends it to Alice, because he can get Alice's public key, but but he don't know for sure if it's Alice. Now, what Alice should be able to do is Alice should be able to decrypt that random number with her private key and send that random number back to Sam, proving she is Alice, because anyone else should not have been able to decrypt that random number. So now Sam is happy. Because he knows Alice is Alice. Alice is happy because she's taking care of Sam's emotional shortcomings and everything else. So then they go off and live digitally happily ever after. Okay, let's talk about hashing. No, not the recreational narcotic, but this is how we do other things. What is hashing? Hashing is similar to encryption. Yes, it is, but it's a little bit different. Hashing is what we call one-way encryption. I don't know why I have to do my fingers this way. One-way encryption. Now, because before when we talked about encryption, cryptography, we encrypted and decrypted, which was two-way. Now we're going to do a one-way encryption. And so what a hash does is it's all about integrity, a way of proving that your information, your message hasn't changed. So what a hash algorithm will do, it will take a message of any length, and when you run it through a hash function, it will produce what we call a digest, a hash digest. And that hash digest is always going to be the same length every time, depending on which hash algorithm you use. And here's just a very simplistic example. I got the word Fox. The blue is the input. If I input Fox into this hash algorithm, this would give me the output, DFCD345. If I took this whole sentence, the red fox runs across the ice, you see, it's still going to give me a hash digest of the same number of characters, but it's going to be a different set of numbers and a different set of characters. If I change one word in this, the red fox walks across the ice. Something changed. So now I should get a completely different set of characters in my hash. Now, as long as I run the same input into the hash, I should always get the same output. That's how we ensure integrity. So meaning that if I take a message, right, and I run it through a hash algorithm, let's say MD5, message digest 5, that's a hash algorithm, and it gives me this right here, 52ED879E. I send you that message, okay? Not the hash sum. I can send you the hash sum, but I will do that separately. But I'm going to send you the red fox runs across the ice. You run it through the same hash algorithm, MD5. It should give you the same hash sum, 52ED878. If anything changed in this message along the way, if somebody put an extra space in there, one letter changed, you're going to get a completely different hash sum. So that's how we prove integrity, meaning that I run it through an algorithm, get a hash sum, I send that hash sum and the message to you. You get the message, you run it through the same algorithm, it should produce the same hash sum. And when you compare the hash sums, you go, yep, they're the same. If they're different, you instantly know that something happened in that message to where it's no longer the same. So when we talk about hash algorithms, like I say, a couple of different ones we use, secure hash algorithm, or SHA. That is really where we're moving to. MD5, message digest 5, that's an older algorithm it was 128-bit digest, and that says that when you run something through it, the output is always going to be 128 bits, whether you run one bit, one letter, or you run 500,000 bits, or 2 billion characters. The output is always going to be 128 to digest. Now, okay, we're moving away from MD5, going to the SHA, the Secure Hash Algorithm series, and because it gives you a longer digest. And why is that important? Well, here again, it goes back to workload factor. When you think about finality, meaning that 128 bits, there's only so many different combinations or permutations that you can have with 128 bits. So with the computing power we have now, you're able to actually run, or using multiple computers, figure out every possible combination of 128 bits, which means that now you can come up with books and ways of showing we know every possible hash value. And that way we don't need to know the message. If I got the hash value, I can reverse engineer and get to where I want to go. So now that's where we start moving to different algorithms that's able to give you different lengths of digest, like SHA-256. That's a 256-bit digest, and you can actually go all the way out to SHA-1024. Now you may say, well, that's great. Let's just all go to 1024 and make it secure. Hey, let's go back to what we talked about before, trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, especially with encryption. Always trade-offs, because a 1024-bit, that's going to take more time to calculate that message digest. So you're trading off security for speed and for processing power. But in a nutshell, that's how that works. All right, guys, we have talked about quite a bit when it comes to encryption, haven't we? We've looked at cryptography and some of the terminologies. We talked about the key management. Then we went into symmetric encryption that had block and stream methods. We talked about asymmetrical encryption, key management, Diffie-Hellman, how we use Diffie-Hellman for key exchange, and how we operate in a hybrid environment where we use asymmetric encryption to do key exchange. Once we've exchanged keys, then we flip to symmetric encryption to do the bulk encryption or encrypt the payload. And digital signatures, we kind of went over that a little bit as well. Talked about quite a few things tonight. I hope this helps you out in understanding encryption. I know many times this is an area that you can read it over and over and over. Sometimes it's kind of hard to grasp the concept. Hey, listen.